Hey everyone, I want to make a quick video. I want to first apologize. We did not record the Abolition of Man talk this time. I just totally forgot till we were about 10 minutes in. And so I didn't want to start 10 minutes in. So I thought I would just make a quick video and kind of recap. So if you have the questions were in the email I sent out a week ago, I think today. So they're in there, but I thought I would just kind of just review the answers to the questions for those of you that might be interested or that had planned on coming and weren't able to. So one thing, the Abolition of Man is extremely important book to me and to my own understanding of the world. And hope that even if you haven't had the opportunity to be a part of those conversations, that you take the time to read the material. It's kind of difficult, but it's worth the digging through. And then if you need any outside help, of course, you're always free to ask myself or Lynn, or just refer to these videos. Did do a talk on the last. I did like a long talk, like a 45-minute talk before the first fireside chat, and then this week I didn't have to do anything much like that. I only did a little bit of just a refresher, so maybe 5 minutes or less, and actually fielded some conversation in that as well. But let's jump in. So we were looking at the Abolition of Man, chapter 2. The second chapter is called The Way. And these were the questions. So what two faculties, according to Lewis, fail to produce or account for morality in the world? So if you're interested in reading a little bit more on this subject, his book, Mere Christianity, he spends a great deal of time developing this idea. So the two faculties, human faculties, he discusses that can't account for morality or account for an objective morality or value system that's outside of ourselves. One is reason and the other is instinct. So, and one of the things I laid out in the first talk was that, so the Enlightenment project, the Enlightenment, if you don't know what the Enlightenment is, the Enlightenment's a time period, began about 1800. I have it on our timeline. I'll actually put a link into the newsletter for that outline so you can see it. But the outline I have has the Enlightenment beginning at about 1800. So you can think about the time the U.S. is founded, and going till about 2000. The year 2000, when we moved from the modern world, which the Enlightenment brought, to the postmodern world, which is the world that you live in now. And so we had a timeline, and I gave it out this time, and I gave the talk on it last time. The Enlightenment is a project where people began to say, okay, we don't believe that we can use religion as the basis for our society. And so we're going to find something else. And so moral philosophers began to consider what else they could use other than in the West, Christianity and God as the basis for a society. And so they started out by reason. John Locke would be one of the first ones. They started trying to use reason for that, coming up with observations. However, that failed to accomplish the goal of finding a unified worldview. And then so the next one was, Lewis calls it instinct. Immanuel Kant will, I think, call it emotion. And the idea goes something like this, I'm over someone's house and I'm visiting with a man and his wife, and I make an overt, advance or pass at a man's wife, and he has a sense in his chest, I'm going to punch that guy's lights out. Or I take your wallet or something, your iPhone, out of your hand, and you have this instinctive grab it back and say, no, that's mine. And so that's what Lewis means by instinct. Immanuel Kant also discusses this in a lot of his works. And so reason failed to account for a morality to be able to build something that we could all agree on. And then instinct fails to also accomplish that too. And the reason why it fails, so the next question was, what has to be present in order to evaluate which instincts are to be obeyed? So we have various different desires that all compete with one another. And so the question is, like, how do we rank those competing desires for the things that we should do? How do we make decisions based on, whether I obey this desire or this desire? And so the answer to the question is, what has to be present in order for us to evaluate which desire or which one of these sort of, he uses instinct or emotion or reason, or what has to be present in order for us to figure out which of these desires to obey. What has to be present is a value system, a system of values, a morality, an exterior morality has to be present. So by showing, one of the ways that you show that instincts can't account, that Lewis does a great job in chapter 2, but he lays out, various different sort of competing thoughts in society. And he says, how do we figure out which one of these thoughts should be obeyed? And he shows that it's really impossible to come up with any type of arrangement without having a moral system, without having an exterior morality, without having a system of value first. So great job he does that. I would encourage you to take some time to read the book. And he says, our next question was, what distinctly modern themes or inconsistencies do you see in this chapter that Lewis is refuting? It's very interesting. If you read there, I don't know that I can find it in quick order, but there's a couple of places here where Lewis actually is mentioning things from our day. So I found one here on page 43 in my book. There has never been and never will be a radically new judgment of value in the history of the world. What purport to be new systems, or as they now call them, ideologies, all consist of fragments from the Tao itself, arbitrarily wrenched from their context in the whole and swollen to madness in their isolation, yet still owing to the Tao and to it alone such validity as they possess. So what does he mean by that? So they wrench some aspect from the overarching world, objective moral world outside, and then they swell it to some madness and sort of ride it to death. Well, one of the things you can think of as having done this is sort of like a modern word we use is equity. So we'll say equity. Equity is sort of a buzzword in our society today. Equity is sort of this thing like fair play. So they've lifted equity out and made equity the dominant or primary value to have, and then they measure all other values next to it without taking account of a lot of the other values in the world. Another thing you might see here is, so there's two different poles that are at work in America, it seems right now. One would be sort of a rabid nationalism. The other would be sort of a rabid globalism. Both of them have their place in the order of the moral. So I have a relationship to my kin and to my wife, to my children, to my neighbors. So I have a subsidiary responsibility to care for my neighbors, but I also have to have a general care, a general welfare also for all men. And so, but how do you take account of which one of those should be at play at any point in time? So again, if an overarching sort of globalist idea lifts one of them out and sort of swells it up to madness, and then a nationalist idea lifts it up and swells it also into madness. Racism and racial context, when he says ideologies, he really is talking about many of the Marxist and critical theories that are rising up when Lewis is writing, and that sort of he prophesies the rise up that came after them, which are all sort of theories that take one aspect, so a racial aspect, and they make it the dominant theme by which they explain everything. Or in another way, they might make colonialism and say developing countries, and they might say the reason these countries are poor is because of colonialism. It was the dominant theme, and that's the way they explain everything by it. So, but when you take all this into account, what generally we do when these ideologies rise up is they use one aspect of what is truly moral. I mean, to be racist is wrong, right? To be sorry, I had something on my screen there. To be to only seek the what's good for your family over and against what's good for all, what's good for yourself over and even what's good for your family. I mean, there's a place for all those things, and so we can't wrench one of those things or lift one of those things out and find it. So we find a lot of what ails the modern person is that they don't take the whole moral objective world. They just take one thing out of it, and then they use the one thing to debunk other people's values without realizing that this very same method can be used against themselves. Lewis masterfully does that in chapter 2. So, can you give an example of a moral truth that's been arbitrarily wrenched from the context in the whole and swollen to madness and isolation? So I just gave you those examples, so we won't answer that again. And then at the end, so Lewis says that the way or the Tao or the natural law can be criticized and reformed from the inside. Can you think of any ways that it has been reformed, and who were the reformers? So what he's saying is saying, look, the traditional worldview that reigned in the pre-modern world definitely had some flaws. Okay, so one of the modern world comes along and says, man, the ancient world really had some flaws, and surely it had some flaws. But the modern world also has some flaws, and the postmodern world has flaws. So all the worldviews of those three worldviews have flaws. But he says, look, there's two ways to criticize something. One is to criticize it from the interior, and one is to criticize it from the exterior. And it's the interior criticism that we want to be concerned with, because it's easy to stand outside of something and criticize it, but legitimate criticism comes from the inside, so that you're not trying to, sort of wad up the objective moral world that God's revealed in creation, the general revelation, and throw it away and create a new one. That's what Nietzsche and many of the moral philosophers were trying to do. And Ayn Rand, for instance, who, while she had many good things to say, her virtue of selfishness is not Christian. It's not a Christian worldview. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the scriptures. So that's very important to understand, that there were people who came along and tried to throw away the naturally ordered creation that's revealed to us in nature and scripture and throw it away. Nietzsche was one, Ayn Rand is one, but we also have some interior critics too, people who are criticizing from the interior and who made a big difference. One of the ones I point out was Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, and then other people, Lynn added this thought to my thought as well when we were talking about it, that, Martin Luther King said, he looked at the Declaration of Independence, he said, all men are created equal, all men are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And he said, we're not living up to this. And we were to cease judging men by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And so, Martin Luther King was an interior critic, and he made a huge impact on the Western world as a whole, not just even on America, but it was an interior criticism. You might look back and see Susan B. Anthony as an interior critic who made significant strides in helping us understand more properly the role of women and the honor and dignity of women that may not have been given to women in every place. So you can see there are interior critics. Some modern critics we brought up were Jordan Peterson, for instance, who was very critical of the modern world, who's offered some very interesting insights as a non-Christian. Also, Rod Dreher as a Christian. So we've read, at least in our book study, we read The Benedict Option, his newest book that just came out, Live Not by Lies. I'm about 7/8 through with it, just about to wrap it up. Very good book, very encouraging read. So been very constructively critical from the inside of what needs to be changed and how Christians should respond to that. So just to recap, Lewis proves without a shadow of a doubt that there is a value system, that there is an exterior morality that has been applied in the world, that that value system is the only thing that can be used to explain the world around us. Its existence exists apart from us, and reason or instinct, or we could even use will. That's one of the other things moral philosophers use. None of those things can explain how we have come to believe and think and live in the framework in which we do. That it wasn't perfectly applied, and that over time there's been great internal criticisms and movements. And some of those were those I just listed. And so our goal is to take that natural revelation that God gives to us in natural law and to refine it and to better apply it and to hand it on then to our children, not to sort of wad it up as if it's failed because there were some failed applications and throw it away. It's something that we can internally criticize, but not externally criticize. And the thing we want to be careful of is to stay out of, and this is another thing that Russell Kirk and some other modern folks thought, that we need to stay away from ideologies, taking one aspect of the natural law, swelling it up, and using it as a judgment against all others without taking account of that value's place in the overarching place in the objective moral world itself. So anyway, I hope these things are helpful for you. I hope that this video then you have some opportunity to watch it and learn from it. If you have any questions, you always reach out to Lynn or I and ask a question. May the Lord richly bless you all. Bye-bye.